And now we move to the next speaker. It will be Carmen Martinez Harris and Dr. Michael Cowley from Queensland University of Technology. And it will be a little shift into science. Carmen is currently a student of a Master of Research here with School of Chemistry and Physics. And Dr. Michael is an astrophysicist. So it will be about astronomy. And I'm really curious because we're all looking at the stars when we come back to all the stories. So I'm really curious how we will link the science and the storytelling. All
Awesome.
yours.
Thanks for having us. I'm coming through okay?
Yes, very good.
Excellent.
And Carmen, okay?
Yep. Am I coming through okay?
Perfectly. Okay.
Thank you.
All good. Okay, thank you for that. Welcome, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Michael. I'm the lead of the QUT Astrophysics Research Group. And today, my research student Carmen and I would like to share our work towards developing a framework for preserving Aboriginal astronomy in southeast Queensland. Before we do that, of course, I'll mention that I'm joining you from the lands of the Turrbal and the Yuggera peoples.
Yep. And I'm joining you from the Whadjuk Noongar People's Land in Perth.
And we pay our respects to their elders, laws, and creation spirits, and also extend that respect to the traditional owners across all the lands from which each of you are joining us today. Okay, I'd like to kick things off today by suggesting that the next time any of you head to a library, and hopefully everyone still remembers what they are, and hopefully they still exist. But if you do head to the library, I want to encourage you to pick up any textbook on the history of astronomy. You'll often find that the first chapter is dedicated to something like the ancient Greeks or the Egyptians or perhaps the Babylonians. And these are all civilizations that are famed for integrating their observations of the night sky into their culture. They are, of course, powerful and fascinating chapters in humanity's exploration of the universe. But the issue is, if you look carefully into these textbooks, you're rarely going to find even a single page on Indigenous Australian astronomy. And that's despite the fact that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have been observing and understanding the stars for more than 60,000 years. And that's 50,000 plus years before the pyramids were even erected as well. And so the question becomes is why do these textbooks get things so wrong? And what are we losing when the oldest continuing astronomical knowledge on Earth is omitted from the story here? As a educator who has the privilege of talking in front of thousands of students from universities and schools every year, in addition to many others during public events, I felt inclined to assist with righting this wrong. Now, I began my personal journey into Indigenous astronomy over a decade ago now. I fumbled around without too much guidance in an attempt to learn before I could teach, part of the motivation for this framework, of course. And it was over this time I was often quizzed on what is the benefit of this knowledge, Michael, given that it's so intertwined with the culture of the Indigenous peoples. And that is, the science here is wrapped up in stories, it's wrapped up in songs, it's wrapped up in artwork, it's wrapped up in their culture. And sometimes it's difficult to disentangle. The argument here was that science is universal, that its laws and its discoveries stand apart from any one culture. The claim was that how we study the atoms or how we chart the stars shouldn't depend on who is asking the question. But I countered. I think the reality is actually a lot more complex than that. Every scientific tradition, whether it's Western, Eastern, or Indigenous, it's shaped by the values of the people that are practicing it. That's the questions that we ask, the topics that we think are important, and even the tools and even the methods that we use. I think they're all influenced by our cultural context. Indigenous science, for example, it's founded on thousands of years, like I mentioned, of observations that have been passed down through things such as stories, songs, and artwork over many generations. And including these perspectives doesn't dilute science at all. It makes it stronger and it makes it more responsive. And even if you ignore all that, I think at the very least, valuing and listening means that when young Aboriginal students gather at the telescope, just like in the example that I've got here, they don't have to feel like visitors in someone else's field. They see astronomy as something that belongs to them as well, while also feeling like it's a part of their heritage and their future as well, just as much as anyone else that's doing the same thing. Now, much of what I know about Indigenous astronomy today comes from the diligent work and the respectful partnerships of cultural astronomers working closely with local custodians and elders. And it's through these collaborations that they've uncovered a tremendous amount of insights across many communities. A remarkable example of this is the Seven Sisters Dreaming, which is linked to the night sky via the Pleiades star cluster, which is what I show in my representation here. There's another beautiful representation, which I'll show here, which is coming to us from Athena Nungala Granitz, a Walpiri woman and a celebrated artist. Athena has mentioned that her art is inspired by her late grandmother, Alma Nungarai Granitz, who passed down the story of the Seven Sisters. And while there's many variations of the story, a common theme is that an ancient evil chased the Seven Sisters who launched themselves up into the night sky to evade. Now, much like nursery rhymes, these stories often encode deeper meanings. And while they can mean something different to each individual, it's this particular story which seems to have a common thread. It seems to be a sophisticated guide instructing communities on things ranging from relationships to responsibilities. And perhaps even more interesting from my perspective is the fact that the changing position of the star cluster was used as a calendar of sorts to identify seasonal change. The fact that they could track the motions of this star cluster and, depending on where it is in the night sky, use it as a way to identify what season it was, which would probably inform them with things such as food, shelter, and so on. Now, consider how this knowledge has been shared. I mentioned 60,000 odd years or so. But for most of human history, written language has been a relatively recent invention developed less than 5,000 years ago. And before that, and still today in some cultures, knowledge is preserved and passed down through other means, such as stories, song, and art. For Indigenous Australians, astronomical knowledge has been shared and sustained through these methods: stories, songlines, art, and ceremony. And they've been doing it, as I mentioned before, for countless generations. The trouble here, though, is recovering and sustaining this knowledge. It's very complex. Colonization has profoundly disrupted traditional ways. It's led to loss, adaptation, and in some cases, even concealment of cultural knowledge across generations as well. Added to this fact is that Indigenous knowledge isn't a single story. As you can see here, across Australia, there are more than 800 languages and countless unique knowledge systems, each with their own way of understanding the night sky. Now, that made me realize something important. The stories that I'm sharing right here, they're not from the local custodians of this land. They're not Turrbal or Yuggera stories. And that matters because astronomy is not just about the stars, it's about connection to country. And so the new question is, well, how do we change that? How do we respectfully recover and share the knowledge of Southeast Queensland while at the same time addressing all the challenges that I faced a decade ago when I began my journey? That's where our framework comes into play. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to pass you over to Carmen, who's going to show you. She's been spearheading this approach and she'll give you a little bit more.
Thank you so much, Michael. I will just share my screen now. All right, is that viewable for everybody?
That looks good.
Perfect, thank you. So I know you can't all talk at me at the moment, but does anyone here recognize this image? How about now? Well, this is the emu in the sky, and you likely recognize it as one of the most famous examples of Aboriginal astronomy. Before the outline appeared, you saw an image of the Milky Way. And usually, when we look at that, we see a galaxy of stars and dust from a Western scientific point of view. But there are deep stories and complex knowledge systems sitting right there within those dark spaces. This is not just a shape in the stars, it is actually a practical guide. For example, when this emu rises, it signals the start of emu breeding season and tells people that the eggs are ready to be collected. It shows just how sophisticated the link is between sky and finding food on the ground. But we have a problem, as Michael pointed out. Mainstream history has largely overlooked these insights. The impact of colonization means that we are losing traditional knowledge, and we need to act now to document these perspectives before they are lost entirely. This brings us to the core challenge. How do we actually do that? How do we ensure that we are being ethical and respectful? Leading on from what Michael said earlier, there are so many different groups and perspectives across Australia. This is especially true here in southeast Queensland, where the specific local stories are not as well documented as they are in other parts of the country. So that is what this project was designed to do. We wanted to take the first step and build a framework that makes it possible to document these unique perspectives in the right way, ensuring that the knowledge of first astronomers is kept safe for future generations. So, how do we make sure we are doing this in the right way? Well, whether we are writing things down physically or we are archiving them digitally, we had to ground this entire framework in 4 key ethical pillars. This included the principle of free, prior, and informed consent, or FPIC, and the protection of Indigenous cultural and intellectual property, or ICIP. We also followed the strict guidelines from the National Health and Medical Research Council and the ATAS Code of Ethics. I want you to think of these documents as our instruction manual. They make sure that ethics are incorporated into the project from day one, rather than just being a checkbox at the end. We have to remember that Aboriginal astronomy is not just about the data. It is a living system that connects a people to their history, and we need to respect that. This becomes really clear when you look at this wheel of Indigenous cultural and intellectual property. You can see here that ICIP is almost holistic. It covers everything from art and language right through to ecological knowledge. The reality is that standard Western laws often fail to protect this kind of shared community knowledge. So we need to get these ethical foundations right before we even think about the technology we're going to use to capture the sky. This brings us to the digital side of preservation. Now, we are living in an era where technology is at our fingertips. I mean, look at this, so we're in a global conference on Zoom. Well, previous work has moved beyond just keeping knowledge in physical books and found ways to preserve it digitally so it is accessible for the future. If you look at my screen now, you can see tools like Stellarium. Now, this software allows us to simulate the night sky with amazing precision. We can effectively time travel and recreate the sky exactly as it appeared to ancestors hundreds of years ago, allowing us to see where things like the emu in the sky would be at any specific moment. But this is where we have to be careful. You see, simply taking Indigenous stories and uploading them into a Western software carries a real risk. Without the strict ethical guidance we discussed earlier, we separate the knowledge from its cultural context. Digital preservation has to be about more than just data points. We need to ensure that we are respecting the stories and preventing misinterpretation. So, how do we put those ethics into practice? We created a framework that splits the project into 2 distinct parts. Stage 1 is the work that I have completed. It was primarily a desk-based review where I sat down and synthesized the existing literature. This allowed me to figure out what we already know and, more importantly, identify the specific gaps for Southeast Queensland. Based on that, I was able to build prototype tools. But stage 1 was really just the preparation, because it laid the groundwork for stage 2, which is the future work that would happen in a research degree. This is where the project moves from the desktop and out into the community. Crucially, this stage is defined by community-led governance. Remember those prototype tools that I mentioned developing in stage 1? Well, in stage 2, we do not just use them, we take them to elders and co-design them, ensuring that we are asking the right questions and in the right way before we ever even turn on a microphone. Now, when we bring these 2 stages together, we have the complete framework. It demonstrates a clear pathway. We move from respectful preparation in the quiet of, in my case, the university library, to active and ethical engagement on country. This ensures that when we do preserve this knowledge, we are doing it in the right way. So, After all this research, where does that leave us? What does the bigger picture actually look like? Well, first, we have confirmed that this is a highly complex knowledge system. Unlike Western science, which often separates data from culture, Aboriginal astronomy connects everything together. It links the land, the sky, and the people in a way that standard documented research often misses. We also saw that there are so many different perspectives across the country. The stories and views held by a group in the Northern Territory might be completely different to those held here in Brisbane. That is why we cannot just rely on general books, so we need to document the specific views of Southeast Queensland. We have found strong existing links to Southeast Queensland to build upon. For example, we know that Jinnabara people have clear connections between the Bora Rings and the Milky Way, proving that this knowledge is embedded right here in the local landscape. And we do know that preservation is possible. We can combine physical documentation with digital tools like Stellarium that we saw earlier, but only if we have the strong ethical safety net in place to protect the stories. But as you can probably see, this puzzle is not complete. We found that the literature for our local region is actually quite sparse. While we have great national data, we are missing the specific local stories that explain how our unique landscape here in Brisbane was formed. Then there is a specific gap regarding the Bora grounds. We know from previous research that these ceremonial Earth rings are often oriented to match the Milky Way or the Coalsack Nebula. However, most existing studies rely on broad general statistics. We need to move beyond just numbers and look deeper into the specific cultural interpretations of these sites for the distinct language groups of Southeast Queensland. And finally, we identified a massive gap in education. We need to ensure that this research does not just stay in a university archive. It needs to be developed into materials for public venues, like the planetarium in Brisbane, so that the people living here can actually learn about the sky above them. And how do we address these gaps? Well, we start here with the framework. But as we move forward, the most critical step is building relationships. We cannot just walk in and start asking questions. We need to establish trust and ensure that the governance of this project is truly community-led. Once those relationships are established, we move to the interviews. As part of the project, I developed a prototype guide with open questions such as, can you share what the night sky means to you and your community? Or how does the sky relate to your country and the changing seasons? But I want to be very clear. This tool is not final. It is a prototype designed specifically for co-design. A future researcher would take this guide to community members to be refined, changed, and approved before any actual interviews can take place. This ensures the questions are respectful, relevant, and culturally appropriate from the very beginning. Only once that foundation is set do we reach the final goal, which is documenting and preserving this knowledge. By following this path, we ensure that we are not just extracting information, but preserving it in a way that benefits the community for generations to come. So this framework provides a rigorous, respectful, and ethical pathway for preserving Aboriginal astronomical knowledge in Southeast Queensland. The ultimate goal of this work is to move beyond simply admiring this complex knowledge from afar. Instead, we wanted to provide a practical how-to guide for ensuring research is done with and for the community, rather than just about them. We believe this work provides the bridge. It ensures that the traditions of Australia's first astronomers can continue to inspire and teach future generations long into the future. To ensure that when we do open those history books in the library, we see and acknowledge the rich depth of knowledge that is Aboriginal astronomy. Before I finish, I would like to thank my supervisor, Dr. Michael Cowley, for his guidance throughout this project. And I would also like to acknowledge the work of Dr. Dwayne Hackmocker, whose research was instrumental in demonstrating that Aboriginal astronomical knowledge is dynamic and scientifically informed, which inspired much of this framework. Thank you for your time.
Wow, amazing. I'm speechless. I want my kids to learn this at school. It was really very powerful research, and I can't believe it. You're only a master by research students. I can't wait when you actually move to PhD and follow next stage. It's congratulations, Carmen. Really impressive.
Thank you so much.
Very. Do we have any question? I was just thinking about how to expand it next, but you answer at the end. So in this case, and looking at the time, I invite you to connect through our Padlet.